Hi, folks, and welcome back to the Workday Innovators Dojo, aka the WID podcast. I'm your host, Peter Shepard. I've been active in the Workday ecosystem since 2014 as a certified implementer, an independent consultant, and a Workday customer. I'm here talking to the experts in the field to share their insights with you on all things Workday. With me today, I have my dear friend, Aaron Wydeen, Workday BIRT product lead and manager of Workday integrations. Aaron, great to have you on the program. Do you mind giving us a little intro?
Yeah, thanks for having me and great to be here. My name is Aaron Wadeen. I'm out of Washington State. I started my venture with Workday ecosystem back in 2015, 2016. I got started on the client side just after a big implementation. I got on the administration team, loved Workday, loved the tool, wanted to know more, and got onto the consulting side of things and have been doing that since, and I love it. Mainly focused in integrations, which in itself is a jack of all trades, I like to say. We touch everything in Workday, so you kind of got to know a little bit about everything. But yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I couldn't agree more. And yeah, thanks for coming on the show to talk about all things BIRT. I think it's a skill set that sometimes gets a little overlooked and doesn't get the love and appreciation that it deserves. So maybe you could start us off. What is BIRT and what is it used for in the context of Workday?
Certainly. So BIRT is a acronym for Business Intelligence and Reporting Tools. It is a kind of like an extension to the Eclipse tool that is Workday Studio itself. So once you have Studio, you install Report Designer, and that's how you can create these BIRTs. And what they are is a tool to design and render and generate financial documents, or I guess any kind of documents, really, in Workday's terms. So that is the way we can. It's a little creative, a little more creative on the creative side. That's why I love it. You're able to pull in different things from the employee, different things about cost centers, and have all that go into this generated PDF that is then presented to the clients.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. And so you started to lead in a little bit, but maybe you could just give us a little flavor for, these documents. What type of documents are we talking about?
Yeah, so I've worked on, I can't even think of how many. I'd say well over 100 different kind of cases, and these are everything from financial documents. So you have your things like supplier checks, customer invoices, customer statements. You also have things like offer letters and compensation, total reward statements. Um, you could even generate employee handbooks that include the employee's name and the date that it was issued to them. So it really can span across any kind of document that you would like to personalize or have some kind of add-in and be generated into a PDF and then presented to the end party.
Awesome. No, that's really good to know. And maybe, it sounds like there's quite a bit to unpack here. So maybe we could just go by functional area and just kind of drill into some of these different use cases. I heard within maybe within HCM to start. So you said an offer letter, which I think most of us have probably gotten one or two in our careers, so probably nothing too fancy or out of the ordinary there. But things like a compensation statement or the total reward statement. Can you talk to us a little bit about what those would typically entail?
Yeah, certainly. So a compensation statement is a formal document that's usually details what a worker was making before a compensation review and then what their change is going to be after that compensation review. So whether it's percent increase to their salary, maybe they qualify for a new salary or I'm sorry, stock or bonus plan. It could also detail that, any kind of stock shares, things like that. So you usually would see those as a end result of a compensation review, merit increase, things like that.
Gotcha. And then how is that different from a total reward statement?
Yeah, so a total reward statement is something that you'd usually see at the beginning of a fiscal year be sent out to employees. This would include, okay, here's what you're going to be making, everything from additional benefits, kind of all of the benefit details, what they'd be getting. So, for example, if I enrolled in this much amount of insurance, it would detail all of that on a very usually user-friendly, nice graphics, charts, the all the everything but and the kitchen sink on that document. So they're usually really robust, really in-depth, pull from a lot of different sources, and present kind of that all-in-one snapshot, aka total reward statement, to the employees.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense, and thank you for breaking that down for us. So yeah, within HCM, so we've talked a little bit about compensation related, benefits related, like you said, with the total rewards. Are there any other areas within HCM that we typically see BIRT being used?
Yeah, so one big area I always see, Bert, is in the talent management process. So whether that is talent cards or performance reviews, things like that.
Okay, and what talent cards, somewhat a generic term. What does that actually look like within the bounds of Workday, or what would that document typically look like?
Yeah, so talent cards are, I guess, usually used by upper management to kind of pull a quick at a glance of their employees, things like skills, certificates, different little aspects that might be specific to, let's say, building out a project team or something like that. So, and with talent cards, there's a little bit different kind of flavor for the different needs. Um, but I guess at kind of that high level, that's what a talent card would be.
Got it. Got it. And then within talent, outside of talent cards, I mean, are there any other kind of statements or documents that we would typically see?
Yeah, so the other kind of BERT generated document in that talent area is performance reviews. So this would be kind of, hey, your annual performance year or mid-cycle performance review. Um, it would also contain different things around the review itself. So it might go over the goals that you guys had talked about during the performance review, some of the feedback that might have been received by management for you. It would also kind of give you any kind of comments your manager had or that you had on that, and kind of give that all in one view of that performance review and everything that happened in that review. And usually I see very many different approaches to this. So it could be something as simple as a single page. It can be something as multiple pages with a lot more detail. But at the high level, it's just kind of that eye at a glance. Here's the performance review. This is how you're doing.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So that's super helpful. So in the talent space, we've got talent cards, we've got performance reviews, like you said, that might be run, one or multiple times a year. So let's change gears a little bit and leave the HCM space. I guess that the next area on my mind would be, financials. Are there any good BERT use cases in the fin module?
Yeah, so first two that come to mind are customer invoices and supplier checks, or any kind of anything involved in those two processes.
Okay. Well, maybe let's start on the customer side. So what does a customer invoice usually entail?
Yeah, so a customer invoice, I guess really the best way to think of this is, for example, your water bill. We're customers. You have your utility company who is the who's issuing out these invoices to us, and that paper with all that information, this is how much you use, this is the price per, let's say, liter of water, and this is how much you owe us here at the end of the month. Um, that is pretty much the best kind of example I could give for a customer invoice. And then, of course, you can take that to any kind of place, work area.
No, I think that makes sense, and I think you're right. Most of our listeners are probably gotten an invoice or a bill in the mail at some point. But staying within the customer space, are there any other types of documents that we might want to use BERT for?
Yes, so customer statements and dunning letters are another two that come to mind within the customer space. And I guess I can kind of go into a little bit on what each of those are, if that's all right.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Uh,
Thank you.
Customer statements are usually an aggregation of out of customer invoices that might be outstanding. They also give a little bit of detail into those invoices. I've seen customers go in uh, kind of at a high level. Here's the invoices. Some like to go a little more into depth and give a little bit more information about the invoices. And again, that's the beauty of BIRT. You can go as little or as much into detail as you'd like. A dunning letter, on the other hand, is something it's a little similar in that it's listing out the invoices, but a dunning letter is aimed at, let's say, after 30 days, customer misses paying an invoice. The dunning letter for that would include, hey, it's gone past the 30 days. Here are all of your outstanding invoices, and is like a little more of a gentle nudge at, can you please pay us? And then those get progressively more and more as the kind of custom ranges are set up. So you might have 3 or 4 dunning letters depending on what the client's needs are, but those letters look somewhat similar, but the verbiage on those letters get a little bit more as kind of the invoices are later and later overdue.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I guess from the customer's perspective, if I missed one invoice, a gentle nudge makes sense. But if I'm 180 days late on 10 different invoices, then maybe a little bit different or stronger language should be used. So that makes sense to me. So yeah, we've talked a good bit about the customer side. I think you alluded to a few on the supplier side. Can you take us through those?
Yeah, certainly. Let's see here. So I know I mentioned checks, supplier checks. The other one that comes to mind is supplier remittances. Um, but yeah, those two would probably be the most common.
Okay, and help me understand what goes into a supplier remittance. Like, what's the use case there?
Yeah, so a supplier remittance is usually issued after a payment has been submitted to the supplier. This is something that is sent out saying, "Hey, we made a payment. Here's what we paid. A, B, and C invoices, and thank you." Essentially.
Gotcha, gotcha, and that makes sense. I mean, knowing the little bit that I do about banking integrations, usually you send a payment to a supplier, maybe it's for 10 invoices. The supplier just gets a lump sum of money, right? They don't necessarily know, this is for invoice one, this is for invoice two. So that what you're saying makes sense from a document standpoint. And we talked a little bit about supplier checks. Maybe you could take us through what those typically look like or what that entails.
Sure. So supplier checks are exactly what you'd think. They're a check image or a PDF that contains a check image. It usually also includes a stub portion that includes what's being paid on that part as well. So a little bit similar to that remittance, but then you also have the physical check. Supplier checks come in all different kinds. You have checks that are at the top of the page, checks are at the bottom of the page. My favorite, the checks that are at the middle of the page. Those usually require a special printer because you're usually printing on a 14-inch, tall page. But nonetheless, that's what a supplier check would be.
Okay. And how would we know, let's say I'm setting up a supplier check for the first time. How do I know what that check should look like?
Yeah, so whenever we go into these types of projects, there's always some communication with the bank in regard to a specification of exactly what and where their MICR line needs to be. And a MICR line is MICR stands for Magnetic Ink Character Recognition. I have that little acronym on my page here. I always forget what it means, but it is very important because that's how you get paid at the end of the day. And a MICR is that little line of text there at the bottom of the check, and it is printed in special ink, and that has to be in exactly this spot on a check. So down to the millimeter, And we've had some banks that push us back, and we have to go even smaller than that in getting that exactly formatted there at the bottom of the page. So having that specification from the bank is incredibly helpful. Also, some banks require a certain layout of the check. So for example, let's put the address here, let's put, the check number there, things like that.
Got it. And I guess because these are so specific, I mean, do you have any tips to, kind of getting it right the first time, or are there any shortcuts that our listeners might be able to take?
Yes. So having done these so many times, uh, having that specification is always kind of key to get going. Every bank is different and is just a little bit more on that MICR alignment. So unfortunately, there is no kind of industry standard or, checks are all required to have this format. So every bank kind of has a little bit different of a looking check. And that also ties even down to the MICR. So on the MICR alignment, it might align a little more left for, let's say, Wells Fargo, a little more right for JP Morgan. Um, but having that specification is key. The next kind of bit that I always like to have is who's helping me on the client side print these checks. And usually what goes into that is, do they already have their MICR printer? Do they already have the check stock that they're printing on? Those two things are really key, because when you go to live in production, you're going to want to know who's printing, what printer is it's printing on, not necessarily for just knowledge reasons, but you want to do your testing on the printer that it's being done on. That's really key in making sure, because I've had cases where we've gone a whole project and they were printing on just a typical Xerox printer, and then they go to print on their MICR check on their MICR printer, and oh, there's a margin. It's all on the left or something like that. So definitely specification, having somebody consistent throughout the project if possible, and always test on the actual production equipment and printer that they'll be using.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I had a similar circumstance where we changed testers throughout the process, and one person was using, I think, Adobe PDF to do the printing, and then somebody else was using actually Google Chrome, and just that small little difference threw off the alignment enough that the bank rejected it, and we went through a bunch of cycles and ate up a bunch of time. But no, that's all really, really great advice. So let's see. We talked a little bit about remittance layouts. We talked about the supplier check. I feel like we've done a pretty good bit on the financials module generally. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, I don't want to say non-standards, but maybe some use cases that aren't especially obvious, or that we don't see on every project. Like, are there instances where BIRT could be used that our listeners may not be thinking about?
Yeah, certainly. So I had an instance where there is a process, record of employment, where some companies or some firms need to have a record of employment. So let's say maybe you go to apply for a new car or a new boat or purchase anything large, and they need to know that you actually work somewhere. You usually would give them your HR contacts. They'll get in touch. The bank will get in touch with your work. And this request right here was one that I had worked on with a company where it was just something very simple. It was, here's a template of what we usually stand out. Is there a way we can pre-fill things like names, addresses, hire date, tenure, things like that on the letter, and make it as simple as the bank calls someone in HR, they get on to Workday, type in their name, hit generate, bam, they have that PDF ready to go, can send that out to the bank contact, record of employment, check.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I guess one of the questions that I always ask, whether we're talking about, financials or HR team, people services, whoever else, if there's ever instances where somebody's pulling data out of Workday and then generating a document, that's a conversation I want to have. Exactly like you said, is there an opportunity for BIRT to come in there and save us some time and maybe standardize that a little bit? Yeah, I mean, so any other kind of ideas or uncommon use cases that you might want to highlight?
Yeah, certainly. And I guess as a kind of an advice for a client going into Workday, or if you're already live on the platform, if there's a process that can be done or that's usually done over and over and over that, hey, maybe this can be done, a little easier. BIRT is definitely a key to help in kind of speed that up and just even if you're throwing something together with a few fields, having that kind of template loaded, bam, you click the button, it pulls whatever you need and generates that PDF for you. Um, with that being said, though, another one that comes to mind was a company holiday calendar that I had created in the past. Um, I know usually that doesn't.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean that's usually pretty static, right? I mean, there's one PDF for
Yeah.
the whole company. Why do I need BERT for that?
Okay, so this one was a little bit out of the ordinary, and the reason for this was because it was a large manufacturing client, and they had multiple unions that all kind of made up the company. With that being the case, each of those unions kind of had different holidays that they respected, and they were based on things like the membership to the union that they were a part of, their tenure, their work location. So, for example, if they were in this state or that state, even sometimes down to the county, it could be different, also their job profile. So, this holiday calendar would take all of that into consideration and then kind of had a lookup for what holidays they would get. And the idea here was that somebody might not know exactly what job profile or their tenure. They just want to know if they have Monday off for the holiday that's coming up. So what this ultimately did was it allowed them to go in, hit print company calendar, and then the BIRT side of things had all of these different calendars in there, and it would just go ahead and take those different aspects I had mentioned, work location, tenure, job profile, and the union membership, and then go ahead and give them the single page what they were after a company holiday. So on paper, it might not be that woo, but when you're trying to save somebody time and you're trying to get that out as quick as possible, that was something that was a big win for them, given all of the different unions that were in that company.
No, I mean it makes total sense to me, especially like you said that worker population in manufacturing. These probably aren't people that are on the company network that often. They may not have their own machines. Hunting around some SharePoint site probably isn't the easiest thing for them to go through. So yeah, why not put it in Workday? I think that's an awesome idea. And I'm sure our audience's gears are turning, just thinking about all the other places in their business where, people are having to hunt and find different documentation and so on. So no, thank you for that. So yeah, we've talked a lot about, the different use cases that BERT could be used for. Are there any specific features within BERT that you would want to highlight that maybe folks might not be aware of?
Yeah, so one that comes to mind is language translation. I think most of the documents that we've talked about so far are usually seen in English, but of course, we do live in the world, and everybody in the world, not everybody, but a lot of different folks speak different languages. So language translation would be definitely a big one that I think is usually overlooked, but very important.
And what does that look like? So it sounds like I may not need a different layout for every language in my worker population, but from a BERT standpoint, like how does that actually work?
Yeah, so thankfully, it's a little more easy, a little more straightforward than that. So normally a company might have, let's say, different layouts for each language. What BERT would allow us to do is create a single layout, and whoever's developing it, it could be in their primary language. So if you're predominantly English or predominantly Spanish, you can code in that and kind of have that be your base. And what these language translations allow us to do is, for example, let's say first block language or text block, hello. What I can do is I can create a lookup or a key in BIRT and have it map for the different languages. So let's say, for example, a Spanish employee logs on, prints the BIRT. It'll go ahead and look at what's their preferred language and then print that document in their language. So hello in English, hola in Spanish, and then there you go. Same thing for somebody over in Germany. And this doesn't also go down to just words and translating sentences and paragraphs. It also can for dates and things like that, or currencies, for example. Depending on how a date's formatted in America, I know we do month, day, year. Over in Europe, they do day, month, day, month, year. Even I've done a million of them, and I still get a little mixed up. But that also is taken into consideration with those language translations. So rather than having 10 different BIRT layouts to maintain each of those, you have the single BIRT layout, and then for each text block or each chunk of text, you would have this translation properties file, which is where you would say, okay, for this text block, this is what it's going to be if somebody in this country or preferred language prints it. And then that way, when they go to print it, you'll see a nicely translated document, which makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And no, it reminds me, I worked with a multinational pharmaceutical company that had, I think, 15 or 16 languages in their worker population, and a complex comp statement is what I was helping them with. And I think if we had an individual comp statement for every country, we would have lost our minds, I imagine. But like, help drive the point home. So why is it so powerful to have all of this in one language instead of having all these different layouts out there? Or sorry, one layout instead of all these different layouts?
Yes. So the key advantage with this is maintenance going down the road. So let's say, for example, down the road we have some of the verbiage change, or let's say, for example, there's a new piece to somebody's compensation. They get a new stock option, or they have access to a new bonus plan. Rather than going through and updating all of those multiple BIRT layouts to add that, you would be able to go into that single BIRT layout, add that, and then all you'd have to be concerned about is updating your translations versus having to go in and then update that in every layout. So it's definitely something that's really helpful if you work in a multinational or global company that works in different languages across different continents. Like I said, even down to the date and currency formats. That is definitely something that's helped in the past.
Awesome. No, thank you. Thank you for that. So yeah, so we talked a good bit about translations. Are there any other, features that our audience might want to be aware of that they may not be?
I
As an
guess with
integrations person.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, usually how these tie into the integrations or how BIRTs tie into the business processes is something else that I'd like to touch on. So you have some BIRTs that tie in at different places. So for example, with offer letters, those BIRTs are usually set up as a document type, and that produces a BIRT. Those are a little more oriented in the document, creating text blocks, things like that. Those all go and rendered into the final BIRT. That's a little bit different than a BIRT like a supplier check or something that comes out of your financial world and comes out of a business process and then over into the integration to be produced. So that's one thing to also keep in mind with BIRTs. It's just kind of the different flavors, different areas, and hit points of where they might be produced.
Gotcha. And I know we said kind of at the top of the call, the BIRT development environment takes place within Workday Studio. Is there an opportunity for me to use Workday Studio in any way with BIRTs in terms of pulling data and things like that?
Yes, and those are my favorite kind of BIRTs to make because you endless possibilities. So what using Studio to produce a BIRT gives you the ability to do is mainly or most commonly pull from multiple data sources. So let's say, for example, um, total rewards is a little unique in that there is a report for that could pull all that data into a single report. But let's say, for example, like I had mentioned supplier remittance earlier. I had an instance where the client wanted to pull in a little bit more detail than just the invoices paid. They wanted to pull in the invoice lines in addition to the invoices that were pulled. Normally, that couldn't be done on the same report to be passed to the BIRT. So in Studio, I was able to have my web service called for get payments, and then that would pull out the invoice document to pass to a RAS report that I had set up that would ultimately pull those invoice lines. And then because Studio, you're able to tidy that all up into one nice XML file and pass that to your BIRT as its data source. So a lot of doors open once you step into Studio to design BIRTs.
Gotcha. No, and thank you for breaking that down for us. It definitely, I think, opens up the world of the possible within Studio, just because you're kind of the master of your own destiny as far as data goes and combining that data. Well, no, I mean, Aaron, thank you so much, for all this great information, and thanks for coming on the show today. To our audience, I'm going to leave a link to Aaron's LinkedIn profile on the show notes. If anybody wants to get in touch with him to talk about BIRT Studio and everything else we discussed today. As always, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you found the show useful, or you enjoyed the content, do us a big favor by giving us a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button wherever you might have found our podcast. If you have an idea for a future show or a guest that you'd like to see on the show, certainly drop a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, again, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We will see you next time.